We're going to go through a hip external rotation dynamic isometric exercise. So for this exercise, hip external rotation being my ability to perform this movement here, I'm going to challenge this movement with this particular exercise. Before we begin though, I want to break the exercise into 3 positions. So in my setup, if I lower myself down, this will be my first position. This is my end range for hip external rotation. I want to spend a bit of time working in this area. And then if I come a little further up midway, this will be zone 2. I also want to spend a bit of time in this zone, and then further up, a bit shy of from where I started, zone 3, again wanting to spend time working here. So for the setup, you have the box. In terms of variables, I can play with how much of the leg I place onto the box. So I could be further back, having less of my leg on the box. I could be further forwards. My supporting leg, I can play with where it is exactly. My knee flexion, so how much I bend this knee is another variable. And also how much this leg is up onto the box, or I could even slide it further down, reducing that hip external rotation angle. Okay, you could even possibly play with a bit of knee rotation here, and also lastly, how you shift weight onto your pelvis. So I could shift more weight to my left side and sink onto that pelvis, onto the hip, or I could shift weight the other way, moving weight a little bit more onto my supporting leg. All these variables in combination will affect how you feel, how you engage that line of tension on your hip. Lastly, for comfort, because we will be here for a little while, is if you feel you need to maybe cushion your position, this could be a good option. So if you struggle, for example, and you find you're somewhat like this, unable to really get the leg flat onto the box, ab mat, folded up towel, or rolled up yoga mat, anything to support under here, you can also do. It will also provide a bit of cushioning, comfort, and it might help allow you to get into a better stretch. So I'm going to give an example of how we'll perform this exercise. The idea is to provide as much movement variability and challenge the hip external rotation exercise in many possible ways from the nearby joints. So what I mean by that is, what I'm going to do is set myself up how I want to. Then before I lower and dump myself down, I'm going to actually try to manipulate my pelvis. So if my pelvis is like a ball of water, I'm thinking I want to anteriorly tilt, so draw water out of the front of that ball, lift up my tailbone, and that should help start stretching out my whole hip region back here. Then from there, I lower my torso into that first zone I mentioned earlier. So here, what I want to do before I start the exercise is to build up an isometric of driving down into the box. So pushing down with my leg, but also rotating to the box. So here I'm thinking to internally rotate into that box. So I'm resisting the box via hip extension as well as internal rotation, coming from the hip. Then I want to explore as much movement variability possible. So here, options you have is to move around with the torso. So I'm turning my upper body. I can use the box to maneuver myself. I'm moving slow to assess how it feels, as things will change. What's being stretched, what's being challenged will change as you move around. And essentially, as I'm turning my torso in this manner, I'm moving my pelvis on top of my leg, and that's what's changing the sensations as I move around. Now, it's not just rotation, but you could also play with how you're shifting weight onto one side of your pelvis and onto the other. And again, that will change a little bit how things feel. I can play a little bit with side bending with the spine, putting a little bit of rotation into the spine, going the other way. And the idea is I'm constantly applying that resistance into the box. I'm constantly pushing down with my leg into the box, contracting these glute muscles back here to make that happen as I'm moving around. And then as I realize I start to really fatigue in that zone 1, I'll come up and I'll continue the same thing in zone 2. So I'll be moving around, I'll be exploring what movements I can, shifting the weight to one side, a bit more onto pelvis, see how that feels, shift the weight the other way, apply the spinal side bending. And the idea is to try and challenge and work as many areas of the hip possible. And again, once I start to fatigue in zone 2, I'll come up to zone 3 and repeat, continue for the duration of that set there. So the variables you have to play with on this setup is twisting your torso, and essentially what we're trying to do is move our pelvis on top of our femur, our leg bone. You can put a little bit of side bending combined with spinal rotation, and again that will help pull on different tissues that will affect this hip region as well. And lastly, this is an exercise that can be performed in different setups. So another way you could perform this exercise would be in your 90-90, and then from here lowering yourself down, performing down here your exercise, and then as you start to fatigue, you gradually work your way up to zone 2 and then zone 3 for the remaining time.